endocardium, myocardium, epicardium. Epicardium is connective tissue. Remember when I was talking about a pericardium, I said that there are two layers. One that touches the heart itself and is called the visceral layer, and one that faces the chest wall. It's the parietal layer, and between them is that small vacuum, the space, right? These two collectively is called a pericardium. Here is the visceral layer of the pericardium, that space, and then here's a parietal layer. Does that make sense? So this epicardium, okay, the epicardium is actually the visceral layer of the pericardium. Does that make sense? Okay? But when you talk about layers of the heart wall, okay, when I talk about layers of the heart wall, this layer is called epicardium. But when I'm talking about basically the pericardium, I don't call this the epicardium anymore. I call this the visceral layer of the pericardium. Does that make sense? Okay? So, I don't know if I told you, but I have two younger sisters. Okay? One of them is a doctor, and she's actually doing a residency in Loma Linda, okay, in her ER. And I have another sister who, she's the youngest one, she's a nurse. And she's graduating from Loma Linda this term with her bachelor's in nursing. She already got her associate's, now she's getting bachelor's. But anyway, if both of them work in the same hospital, okay, one's a doctor, one's a nurse. If my sister who's a nurse, if she comes across my sister who's a doctor, do you think she's going to call her Dr. Mehta, or do you think she's going to call her by her name, first name? At the hospital setting, she's a nurse, she's a doctor. What do you think? Doctor. She's not going to call her by her first name or her nickname, right? Regardless, they're sisters. But at home, do you think she's going to refer to her as doctor, or she's going to call her? Does that make sense? Same concept. When I'm talking about, or when someone talks about the layers of the heart, this layer is called epicardium. When you're talking about the pericardium itself, this layer is no longer called epicardium, it's called the visceral layer of the pericardium. Does that make sense? One layer has two different names depending on what you're talking about. Okay? Okay. Now let's talk about the blood flow. You guys already know the structure, so I'm not identifying it. You already know this now. Okay? Now we're going to see how blood flows through the heart. Okay? So blood comes in via superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. So blood drains into the right atrium via inferior vena cava and superior vena cava. The blood goes through the tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve, when it opens up, blood enters the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, when the valve is open, when the pulmonic valve is open, blood enters the pulmonary trunk or the pulmonary artery. Okay? Pulmonary trunk splits up into pulmonary artery. But if you call this pulmonary trunk or the pulmonary artery, I would accept both answers. Okay? Now, from there, basically, blood goes to a distant site, which is the lungs. Okay, so blood goes to the lungs. Lungs, you have gas exchange. Okay? From the lungs, blood comes back via the pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein drains blood into the left atrium. From the left atrium, when the bicuspid valve is open or the mitral valve is open, blood enters the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, when the aortic valve is open, it will enter the aorta. And from the aorta, it will go to the body. Okay? So from there, it will go to the body. From the body, blood comes back to the vena cavas, and the cycle starts again. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, yes?
What is that in the
Body. Now, the right side of the heart contains deoxygenated blood. The right side of the heart contains deoxygenated blood. The pulmonary artery or pulmonary trunk contains deoxygenated blood. Okay? As soon as you go to the lungs, now it's oxygenated. So the left side of the heart contains oxygenated blood. Pulmonary vein contains oxygenated blood. Aorta contains oxygenated blood. Okay? The vena cavas contain deoxygenated blood. So, the vena cavas, right side of the heart, pulmonary artery or the pulmonary trunk contains deoxygenated blood. The pulmonary vein, the left side of the heart, and the aorta contain oxygenated blood. Now, who could tell me basically a contraindication? It's
the only time the vein carries, it switches.
Exactly. So when we are talking about vessels, what did I say? Vein contains deoxygenated blood, right? And arteries contain oxygenated blood. Within the heart, not the blood that's actually supplying the heart. Okay, those are coronaries. Vessels that actually supply the heart with oxygen or with blood, they're called the coronaries. These are just other vessels. So within the heart, there's an exception. The artery contains deoxygenated blood. The pulmonary trunk of the pulmonary artery contains deoxygenated blood, where the pulmonary vein contains oxygenated blood. Because veins always bring blood back to, oh, I forgot to say that. Veins always bring blood back to the heart. Arteries always take blood away from the heart. Okay? So the function of the artery and the vein in the previous, veins always take blood to the heart. Arteries always take blood away from the heart. Okay? Now, in the lab, you would learn about the surface anatomy of the heart. Okay? You'll learn about the sulcus and the septum and stuff like that, but you'll see that. Now, one thing I would say, the apex of the heart is at the bottom. Okay? But you will see that more when you actually have the real heart. Now, the heart is on our left side of the body. We only have one heart. Do you think the heart is located this way? It's located this way. It's pointing towards the left, its axis. So this is the heart. This would be the apex. It's not pointing this way. The axis or the apex is always pointing towards the left side. So it's like this. Okay? Your heart is basically the size of your fist. Okay, that's how big your heart is. Now we're going to talk about the cardiac cycle. What is the cardiac cycle? Rhythmic contraction of the atria and the ventricles, followed by their relaxation. So rhythmic contraction of atria and ventricles, and then the relaxation. That is the cardiac cycle. Occurs every 0.08 seconds, and blood forms uniformly, meaning in one direction, and silently. If I listen to your heart rate, and if you don't have any disorders, I cannot hear blood flow. If I do, it means there's a problem. Okay? So the cardiac cycle has two phases, systole and diastole. So the cardiac cycle has two phases, systole and diastole. Systole actually has two parts. Now, in the first phase, okay, the 2/3 of the phase. Okay, this is 2/3, and this is like 1/3 of the phase. 2/3 of the phase. The chamber, the valves are closed, and the chamber is just contracting. Okay, valve closed, and chamber contracting. Does that make sense? Why is it contracting? To build pressure. So it's saying right here, let's say this is my left ventricle. Here is my tricuspid valve. This is my left ventricle. Here is my bicuspid valve, and right here would be my aortic valve. Okay, all of the valves are closed. Making sure this is closed. Okay. And it's okay. It's not closed. Okay? But you guys can understand, it's just contracting. Okay, therefore to build pressure within the chamber. Now, the second or the last phase, or the 1/3, last portion of systole is where the appropriate valve opens up. Okay? The valve opens up and the blood is being ejected to the next place. Does that make sense? Valve opens up and blood ejected into the next phase. So, as I was saying, this is my left ventricle, right? Now this occurs to every single chamber. The right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, left ventricle, all of them go through this. But I'm just using the example right now, my left ventricle. So this is my bicuspid, here's my aortic, okay? So during systole, the first phase, or the first 2/3 of it, both of the valves are closed, it's just contracting. I'm not going to try that again. And the pressure is just building. This 1/3, the last phase, the valve opens up and blood is being ejected to the next phase, next place. So which valve opens up? Is it the bicuspid or the aortic? So you think the bicuspid is going to be open up and blood is going to be going into the left atrium? No. Because remember, blood only goes one way, it doesn't go backward. So left atrium just gave blood to the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, blood has to enter the aorta. So during the last 1/3 of the phase, the aortic valve will open up, not the bicuspid valve. The aortic valve will open up, blood will go into the aorta. As soon as blood has entered the aorta, the aortic valve closes, therefore blood cannot go backwards. Does that make sense? If I was talking about the right, or let's say left atrium, okay? In left atrium, during the first phase, first part, the bicuspid valve is closed and the atria is contracting, trying to build pressure. As soon as it reaches the end of systole, the bicuspid valve opens up and blood drains into the left ventricle. And at that time, the aortic valve is closed. Does that make sense? Yes? Please understand that, because when you go into physiology, it gets more detailed, as we have to learn the cardiac cycle. Ventricular systole, ventricular diastole, and it's confusing. You'll see me struggling trying to explain you that, because 2-3 different things is occurring at the same time. So you have to get a picture, because different stuff is happening in atria, different stuff is happening in ventricle, everything's happening together. And trying to get that big whole picture takes a while to understand. Because I can't explain you 2 things at a time, I can only explain you one time. But you have to connect the dots. Does that make sense? So if you don't understand this basic, when you get into cardiac, it's one of the hardest systems. So this is why I'm spending more time, because when we go into cardiac system, you better know all of this in and out. Okay, dystole, the diastole. Diastole is when the chamber, when the chamber is relaxed. Dystole is when the chamber is relaxed and filling with blood. Okay? Dystole is when the chamber is relaxed and filling with blood. Now let's talk about the heart sounds, pulse, and blood pressure. Heart sounds. When you hear somebody's heart, when you hear a right? Those are heart sounds. What causes heart sounds to occur? What do you think? What creates that sound? Is it valves opening and closing, or only opening, or only closing? If I leave right now, okay, do you think you actually hear the door opening, or do you hear the door slamming? You usually will hear. Yeah, this thing is loud, but I mean in a sense, usually you hear when the door slams shut, okay? So the heart sounds are created by closure of the valves. closure of vowels. Now, okay, that's what heart sounds are. You have two normal heart sounds, S1, S2. S1 is a lub. S2 is a dub. So you always hear lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. That's your normal heart sound. Okay? Now S1, it's a closure of what vowels? AV vowels. So S1 is due to closure of the AV vowels. Both the tricuspid and the bicuspid. S2 is closure of semi-lunar vowels, both the aortic and the pulmonic. Okay? You don't need to know that.
What was the second one? S2 was?
Semi-lunar. So AV valves within the heart come before the semi-lunar, right? So there's AV valves have to close before the semi-lunars can close. So S1 is the lub, S2 is the dub. Lub corresponds to the closure of the AV valve, dub corresponds to the closure of the semi-lunar on both sides. Okay, now pulse. Pulse is stretching and recoiling of the artery. So when you feel your pulse, you feel the stretching. That's because blood has just entered the artery, and therefore it stretches that vessel. And that stretching and recoiling, as soon as blood leaves that site, leaves the vessel, it comes back. That's a pulse, stretching and recoiling of the arteries. Okay? Now, blood pressure. Blood pressure, basically, you always hear 120 over 80, right? That's blood pressure. And you can see blood pressure has two values. The top value, or the larger number, is called systole. The lower number, or the bottom number, is diastole. The phase is systole. So you can, right here, you can see 120 to 80. That is normal. So normal blood pressure is, I'll come back to that. Okay, systole. What does that mean? What is the pressure within the heart? What is the pressure within the vessels when the heart is contracting? That's what systole means. Pressure within the arteries when heart is contracting. Okay? So what is the pressure within the system when the heart is contracting? Distally. Pressure within the vessels when heart is relaxing. Okay? As you know, in the cardiac cycle, systole means the heart is contracting, dystole means the heart is relaxing, filling with blood, right? So the 120 tells you this is the pressure within the vessels when the heart is contracting. 80 tells you this is the pressure within your arterial system when the heart is relaxed and filling with blood. Okay? What is the function? Why do you have blood pressure? Basically, the difference in pressure is needed to cause the movement of blood. Everything moves because of the difference in the gradient. Everything moves from a high to a low. Okay? Does that make sense? If you did not have these differences in pressure, blood would not move at all. Okay, so blood pressure is needed to allow blood to move throughout our body. Normal. Now, 100 to 120 is normal for systole, but 60 to 80 is normal for diastole. Okay? So somebody could have 110 over 70. Is that normal blood pressure? Yes. Okay? It's when they start having, let's say, 90 over 50. That's when they have low blood pressure. Or when they have 130 over 90. That's high blood pressure.
Do the numbers fluctuate together?
Usually.
Okay.
Does that always mean? No, because it depends on the conditions, some abnormalities, but usually, yeah.
Do the lower the numbers mean the more unhealthy a person is? Like, do you want to shoot for the 120 over, 120 over 80?
Yes, you do not want to go below, let's say, 100 over 60.
Okay.
Because if you have low blood pressure, it means there's not enough pressure for the blood to circulate, and you feel dizzy. Okay, patients who have low blood pressure are advised to take a lot of salt intake, therefore to retain water, because the blood won't flow. If you have too much, so if you have 130 over 90, now that's pre-hypertension, okay? That's dangerous too, because it's causing a lot of pressure, a lot of problems. And then pathophysiology and physiology will learn actually the consequences. But you want to stay ideally between 100 to 80, okay? So 100 to 120 to 60 and 80, that's ideally what you want to be in there. Now, you do not want to do 100 over 80. Does that make sense? You want to kind of have corresponding as 120 over 80, that's a 40 millimeter difference. You kind of have to, the difference between the systole and diastole should be proportional, okay? And usually it does change accordingly. If it's 5 millimeters here, then that's not a big deal. Yeah.
So you wanna like shoot for 40 difference?
Yes. Oh, this image is just showing you right here, the pressure in the arteries is 120 over 80. As you can see, when you put into arterials, you see a drop, a huge significant drop in blood pressure. Then you have drop in blood pressure, but it's not that significant. It's slow progression.
Wait, I have one more question.
Yes, sorry.
So the difference of 40 plus or minus 5.
I mean, if you, somebody who has, let's say, 115, and instead of having, they still have 80 instead of 75, is that a big problem? No. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now the last part of the heart, we're going to talk about conduction, then I'll give you like a 10-minute break before we talk about the blood. Okay, now the conduction system. There are specialized cardiac muscle cells that coordinate the sequence of a cardiac cycle. So cardiac cycle was basically contract, relax, contract, relax. Now you have somebody else supervising that, coordinating that. You do not want the heart to randomly contract and not contract, you know? There's a systemic way of doing it. And there are specialized cells who chaperone that, who basically monitor that and control that. That's called the conduction system. It initiates and distributes the electrical impulses throughout the heart in an orderly fashion. Okay, it has 4 parts. Now, the first one is SA node. Now you have to know them in this order, okay? SA node, sino-atrial node. SA node stands for sino-atrial node. That's going to be too small to write in. You need to get a number. Because we have stuff to fill in. So the first one is the sino-atrial node, or the SA node. The SA node location is within right atrium. So the SA node is located within the right atrium. Function starts the impulse and spreads it